So, if I handed you a spreadsheet right now detailing a mystery economy, and the very first thing you saw in there was a youth literacy rate of basically 99.4%, what would you think?
I mean, honestly, I'd immediately think we're looking at a fully developed, high-income nation.
Right.
It's the classic statistical profile of a society that is just coiled like a spring. When you see educational penetration at that level, standard economic theory tells you this place is poised for an absolute explosion of productivity.
Exactly. And then let's say you scroll down that same spreadsheet and you see this massive, unprecedented spike in women graduating from university. We are talking about a five-fold increase in just a couple of decades.
Oh, yeah. If you were, say, an international investor or an economist looking at those human capital metrics, your natural assumption is that you are staring at the next Silicon Valley.
Yeah, you'd expect a booming tech sector, right?
Absolutely. A booming tech sector, a rapidly expanding middle class, and gross domestic product numbers that are just absolutely off the charts.
But today, we are looking at a region where that exact educational miracle has collided with, well, total economic paralysis.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast.
It really is. Instead of an economic powerhouse, if you zoom out on the spreadsheet, you find an environment suffering from extreme GDP volatility, a massive and chronic trade deficit, and a system fundamentally reliant on external aid just to keep the lights on.
Right. It is a profound structural fault line.
And that is the exact paradox we are unpacking for you today. We are looking at the West Bank and Gaza.
It is arguably one of the most complex, seemingly contradictory economic landscapes on the planet right now.
So what's our roadmap for today?
Well, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a really fascinating 2024 research report. It's titled The Structural Paradox of High Human Capital and Economic Vulnerability.
Sounds heavy.
It is, but it's crucial. We're looking at that alongside a massive cache of economic, demographic, and institutional data from our sources. But, our goal here isn't just to list off a bunch of statistics.
Please no, nobody wants to just listen to a math lecture.
Exactly. We need to figure out the actual mechanics of this paradox. We need to understand exactly why a 99% literacy rate literally cannot buy prosperity when it's boxed in by severe physical, structural, and political realities.
Okay, let me try to frame this with a visual for you, the listener. Imagine a society has dedicated decades of sweat, resources, and cultural willpower to building a state-of-the-art, high-performance Ferrari engine.
I like this analogy already.
Right. So that engine is the highly educated youth. They are tuned, they are brilliant, they are ready to run. But because of the environment they are trapped in, they're being forced to drop that brilliantly engineered Ferrari engine into a car with square wheels.
Square wheels and a rusted chassis.
Yes, square wheels, a rusted chassis, and absolutely no gas tank. The engine revs, the noise of the potential is deafening, but the car physically cannot move forward.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. And to understand why the car has square wheels, we really have to start by looking at the hard physical canvas this economy is trying to operate on.
So, setting the scene, basically.
Exactly. Before we even touch on the brilliance of the human capital, we have a look at the geographic realities that dictate what is even mathematically possible.
Right, because an economy doesn't exist in a theoretical vacuum on a whiteboard. I mean, it exists on actual dirt.
Dirt, water, physical space.
It requires all of that to act as the baseline. So what does the physical baseline look like here?
The environmental and geographic constraints are, well, they're exceptionally severe. Let's look at the baseline natural resources. The forest cover in this region is a mere 1.6%.
Wait, 1.6? That's practically zero.
It is.
Mm.
When you compare that to global averages, it is an incredibly stark visual of a resource-poor environment.
And without forests, you have issues with soil retention, microclimates, all that stuff.
Exactly, it cascades. But the metric that really dictates the economic ceiling here is agriculture. Historically, agriculture is the backbone of early economic development. It's how a society builds self-sufficiency in a surplus.
Right, you feed yourself first, then you sell the extra.
Exactly. But here, only 5.7% of agricultural land is equipped for irrigation.
Hold on, let me make sure I heard that right. Only 5.7%. So
Yeah.
over 94% of the farming is, what, just crossing their fingers and hoping it rains?
Precisely. It is entirely dependent on rainfall. and in a region that is very prone to arid conditions and climate shifts, that makes the entire agricultural sector incredibly vulnerable to climate shocks.
Let's walk through what that actually means for a local farmer. Like, if you only have rainfall, you can't guarantee your crop yield.
You really can't.
And if you can't guarantee your crop yield, you obviously can't sign a contract to export 1,000 tons of tomatoes to Europe because you literally don't know if you'll actually have them. You can't build a robust, export-oriented agricultural sector without actual water productivity.
And you also can't secure a bank loan for new farming equipment. I mean, if the bank knows a single dry season will completely bankrupt you, they won't lend to you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the risk is just too high.
Exactly. It severely challenges agricultural independence and, by extension, basic food security. Now, compound that highly constrained natural resource base with the demographic reality.
Which is?
You have rapid urbanization and a very high population density. The population is growing and it's concentrating in urban centers, putting massive, massive pressure on infrastructure.
But they are doing this without the natural resource base to support it.
Right? They don't have the agricultural surplus to organically support that kind of rapid urban expansion.
So you have a booming urban population that the local land physically cannot feed. That means you have to import food, which costs money.
A lot of money.
We'll get to that drain in a second. But first, let's translate this constrained physical environment into the macroeconomics. What does the actual output of this economy look like? Because the data paints a picture of what can only be described as a terrifying roller coaster.
Yeah, roller coaster might actually be an understatement.
Right.
When we look at the macroeconomic output, specifically real GDP calculated at constant 2015 prices, the instability is just breathtaking.
Let me just interject for a second to clarify the jargon for you. When economists say real GDP at constant 2015 prices, they just mean they're stripping out the illusion of inflation.
Exactly.
So if a loaf of bread cost $1 in 2015 and $2 today, the economy didn't double in size, the money just lost value. So constant prices lets us see if the actual physical output of the economy, the literal number of loaves of bread being baked, is actually growing, right?
Exactly right. It gives us the unvarnished truth of economic output. And if we look at per capita GDP, which is the total economic output divided by the population, adjusted for purchasing power so we can actually compare it globally, it hovers around the $6,300 to $6,400 mark during its better periods in recent years.
Okay, so about $6,300.
Right. But that average number completely masks the true story. The true story is the sheer volatility.
And this is where the data gets genuinely alarming. I mean, in normal developed economies, say, the US or the UK, a recession of 2 or 3% is front page news.
Oh, it caused panic in the stock market.
Right. Politicians lose their jobs over a 2% drop. But the data for the West Bank and Gaza shows growth rates that frequently plummet to depths that are honestly hard to comprehend.
Yes. Because of the unique external environment, the geographic constraints we just discussed, and the geopolitical realities, the economy has experienced years where the growth rate violently contracts. We are talking about drops worse than negative 20% in a single year.
A 20% contraction overnight. I want you to really visualize what that means on the ground.
It's devastating.
Imagine you are a local entrepreneur, you own a furniture manufacturing business, you want to plan your inventory for next year, you want to hire 5 new carpenters, you want to take out a loan to expand your factory.
Standard business growth.
Exactly. But there is a realistic statistical probability that your entire consumer market, the entire purchasing power of your society, might shrink by 1/5 in 12 months. What do?
You do nothing.
Right. You don't take the loan. You don't hire the carpenters. It makes long-term planning mathematically impossible.
It entirely destroys capital formation. To explain the mechanics of that, an economy grows when businesses and individuals feel secure enough to save money and invest it in long-term productive assets.
Like pouring concrete.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They build factories, they buy software, they invest in heavy machinery. These investments take a decade to pay off.
Yeah.
But extreme volatility incentivizes the exact opposite.
Right, because why risk it?
Exactly. It incentivizes immediate consumption or worse, capital flight. You don't pour concrete for a factory if you don't know if the roads to transport your goods will even be open next year.
Which means the local economy never builds the heavy infrastructure it actually needs to generate wealth. And this brings us to the next massive structural issue, which the sources highlight as the bleeding economy, the trade deficit.
Yes, the balance of trade and goods and services compared to GDP is in deep, deep negative territory. Recently, it hit negative 3.6%.
Let's break down the mechanics of a trade deficit for a moment. So a trade deficit means a region is buying from the outside world more than it is exporting or selling to the outside world.
Right.
Now, a minor deficit isn't always a crisis. Even wealthy countries have them. But the scale and the structural nature of this deficit are different, aren't they?
Completely different. The source material describes it as a profound heavy import versus light export dynamic. If you look at the data, the value of goods imported in current U.S. dollars is continuously climbing.
Because they have to buy everything.
Right. The region is constantly forced to buy from the global market.
Yeah.
They have to import fuel. They have to import food because of that 5.7% irrigation limit we talked about.
Yeah.
They import consumer goods, machinery, medicine.
But they can't sell back.
Exactly. They fundamentally lack the capacity to sell back to the global market at a comparable volume.
Because of the square wheels on our car. They don't have the unhindered borders, the deep water ports, the secure supply chains, or the massive capital investment required to manufacture export goods at a global scale.
Yeah, the infrastructure just isn't there to support it.
So money is constantly flowing out of the local economy to buy absolute necessities. But new money isn't flowing in from sales. It's just a massive, continuous drain of capital.
It is a systemic hemorrhage of domestic wealth, which naturally raises a very glaring question. When you look at an economic ledger that is this permanently lopsided, the math literally shouldn't work.
Exactly. This is exactly what I was wondering when I was reading the report. If you are an economy that is constantly spending more than you make, a society that has to import almost all its basics and exports very little, and your baseline economic growth can randomly drop 20% overnight, how are they not just reverting to a barter system?
It's a miracle they haven't.
Right. How do you keep the lights on?
The answer is external life support, specifically official development assistance, or ODA, basically foreign aid.
Okay, but surely injecting billions of dollars into an economy creates jobs, right? It builds roads, it funds schools. How does this fit into the paradox?
To understand the paradox, you have to look at the sheer scale of the dependency. The statistics are staggering. If we look at net official development assistance historically, it has accounted for upwards of 50% of the value of all imports into the West Bank and Gaza.
Wait, let that sink in for a second. Half of everything coming into the economy, half of the physical goods, the food, the fuel, the medicine was effectively being subsidized or paid for by foreign aid.
Yes.
That means the per capita ODA received there is consistently among the absolute highest anywhere in the world. Who is footing this bill? Where is this massive capital injection actually coming from?
The data points to key bilateral lifelines. The primary donors driving this capital formation have historically been Western nations. So Germany, Sweden, Norway, the United Kingdom, and the United States, alongside various multilateral institutions.
Wow.
Yeah, they are injecting billions of dollars into the system.
Okay, so the internal engine can't generate the power, so they literally plug the entire economy into the wall. Obviously, this aid is preventing a complete humanitarian and economic collapse. It's literally feeding people, it's keeping the hospitals running, it's funding municipal services. But you're saying this creates a trap. How can free money be a trap?
It's a phenomena economists sometimes compare to Dutch disease, though here it's driven by aid rather than, say, oil exports.
Okay, Dutch disease.
Right. When an economy relies so heavily on external financial injections, it never develops autonomous blood-making capabilities. In a healthy economy, the government builds infrastructure, which allows private businesses to grow, which allows the government to collect taxes, which funds more infrastructure. It's a self-sustaining loop.
But here the loop is broken. The government and the economy are relying on foreign capital to fund their budget.
Precisely. They are not generating internal revenue through private sector growth or robust export taxation. The entire economic baseline is tethered to the goodwill, the foreign policy budgets, and the shifting political winds of donor nations thousands of miles away.
It's like living entirely off a wealthy uncle's monthly allowance.
Exactly.
You can pay your rent, you can buy groceries, you might even be able to buy a nice laptop to study with, but you aren't actually building your own career. You aren't building equity. You aren't creating generational wealth.
Or just surviving.
Right. And if your uncle suddenly loses his job or simply decides he wants to spend his money elsewhere, you are instantly destitute because you have absolutely no internal capacity to generate that rent money yourself.
That is the exact structural vulnerability. When your GDP is propped up by ODA rather than internal productivity, any shift in donor foreign policy instantly translates into a domestic economic contraction. The foundations of the economy are entirely externalized.
Okay, so up to this point, we've painted an incredibly grim picture of the macroeconomic reality. The region is geographically constrained with virtually no water security. It's highly volatile with 20% GDP swings. It's bleeding capital through a massive trade deficit, and it's dependent on the financial IV drip of foreign aid.
Sounds like a broken system.
It really does. But here is where we pivot. Because despite this incredibly hostile economic environment, despite the volatility and the constraints, this society has managed to cultivate an asset that is genuinely, undeniably world-class. It's time to talk about the crown jewel of this report.
The human capital miracle. And, using the word miracle is not an academic exaggeration. When you look at the raw data in the context of the volatility we just spent the last 20 minutes discussing.
Let's look at these numbers because they blew my mind. The total youth literacy rate that encompasses ages 15 to 24 sits at 99.39%.
It's incredible.
We are talking about near universal literacy in a region that has experienced multiple severe economic and political shocks over the exact lifetimes of those youth.
It is a profound societal achievement. Let's dig into the mechanics of what it takes to achieve a 99.39% literacy rate in this specific environment.
Yeah, how do they do it?
To maintain that level of educational continuity requires a cultural dedication to learning that overrides massive physical and economic disruptions. It means parents are prioritizing education above almost everything else, even when the economic returns are uncertain.
That's a cultural pillar.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the adjusted net primary enrollment is nearing 95%. Almost every single child is fundamentally anchored in the foundational school system.
But the metric that really signals a massive structural societal shift, the one that really caught my eye in the data, is the gender parity.
Yes, the Gender Parity Index, or GPI. This is a fascinating data point that challenges a lot of preconceived notions. For primary and secondary enrollment, the GPI is rock solid at around 1.0.
Meaning perfect statistical parity.
Exactly.
For every young boy sitting in a classroom, there is a young girl sitting in a classroom.
Exactly. But it actually goes further than that. When you track this cohort moving up the educational ladder into higher education, the parity doesn't just hold, it flips. Women actually begin to consistently outperform men in both enrollment and degree attainment at the tertiary level.
This is what the sources refer to as the higher education boom, or the elite leap. If we look at the 25 and older demographic, the data here is just phenomenal.
It really is.
Over roughly 2 decades, the percentage of adult women holding a bachelor's degree absolutely skyrocketed. The data shows it started from an early baseline of just 4.6%. That is a society where higher education for women was a rare exception, likely reserved for the ultra-wealthy.
Right, a very small elite.
And over a relatively short period, it surged to a massive 26.1%.
You are looking at more than a 5-fold increase in the penetration of university degrees among the female adult population in essentially a single generation.
That's just wild.
And it doesn't stop at bachelor's degrees. The source material explicitly notes that master's degrees and deeper specialized academic qualifications are also continuously rising.
What's wild is that they aren't stopping at 4-year degrees. They're going back for their master's in record numbers. I mean, think about the talent density. A quarter of the adult female population holding university degrees is a staggering talent pool by any global standard.
It's a massive resource.
If you have that concentration of highly educated, literate, and specialized human capital, you have the raw material to build a sophisticated service economy. You could build a tech hub, a research and development powerhouse, a financial services sector.
You have the Ferrari engine. It is beautifully built, meticulously tuned, and ready to perform at the highest levels of the global knowledge economy.
Which brings us crashing into the core paradox of this entire deep dive, the labor market trap. Because what happens when you finally turn the key on that beautiful Ferrari engine?
Absolutely nothing.
Literally nothing.
This is where the structural paradox reaches its most painful and frustrating point. Economists look for something called the education premium.
Okay, unpack that for us.
In a functioning, healthy economy, higher education commands a premium. You spend 4 years getting a degree, your statistical chance of employment goes up, and your expected lifetime salary goes up. It's the basic reward mechanism of capitalism.
Right, the whole go to school so you can get a good job promise.
Exactly. But here, we see the disappearing education premium. Those high degrees are simply not translating into jobs.
The data on the employment to population ratio for the 15 to 24 age group is chronically low. And unemployment among the highly educated, especially those young women who just defied all the odds to achieve that 26.1% bachelor's attainment rate, remains extraordinarily severe.
It represents a massive, tragic misallocation of human potential.
So I have to play devil's advocate here. When I see high unemployment among graduates, my first thought is, are they studying the wrong things? Is this a skills mismatch?
It's a common assumption.
Like, are the universities churning out thousands of literature and history majors when the local economy actually desperately needs software engineers, logistics managers, and specialized electricians? Or is it a brain drain where the absolute best and brightest just immediately emigrate?
It is a very valid question, and it's usually the first place policymakers look. But the source material analysis indicates that while both of those factors absolutely exist, there is certainly outmigration of top-tier talent, and there are undeniably gaps between rigid academic curricula and modern market needs. They are not the root cause of this specific paralysis.
So if it's not the curriculum, what is it?
The broader, overwhelming issue is structural. The local economy is physically and institutionally incapable of absorbing this much high-tier talent. Remember the 20% GDP drops we discussed earlier?
Oh, right, the volatility.
The complete lack of long-term capital formation. A shrinking or stagnant private sector simply cannot hire a booming population of university graduates, regardless of what their major is.
That makes sense.
If there are no tech startups being founded because of capital flight, it doesn't matter if you graduate 10,000 software engineers. There are literally no desks for them to sit at.
So it's not that the graduates are unemployable, it's that the jobs simply do not and currently cannot exist within the local physical economy. But I want to look closer at the gender disconnect because the data shows a really stark, specific reality for women.
Yes, the gender gap is profound here.
Despite that massive 26.1% degree rate, female labor force participation is vastly lower than men's. If they have the degrees, why aren't these highly educated women entering the workforce, even just to compete fiercely for the very few jobs that are there?
Because when you look at the time use data, it reveals a massive hidden layer of invisible, unpaid labor. The data shows that women bear an overwhelming, disproportionate share of unpaid domestic and care work.
Let's paint a picture of this to make it real. Let's imagine a hypothetical 25-year-old woman named Layla. She just got her master's degree in chemistry. She is brilliant.
Top of her class.
Right. But because of the investment chill and the lack of a thriving industrial sector, there are zero commercial laboratories hiring in her city. So she's at home. And because she's at home, and because public services or affordable childcare might be severely strained or non-existent, the societal expectation falls entirely on her to manage the household, care for aging parents, and raise children.
Exactly. Society has loudly encouraged her to attain the absolute highest levels of education, which is reflected in the 1.0 parity index. But the underlying structural and social expectations regarding domestic labor have not shifted at the same pace.
So the expectations are stuck in the past.
Right. So she has the advanced degree, but her physical time is entirely consumed by maintaining the household survival.
And for the portion of women who do manage to work, the data categorizes a surprisingly large segment of them as contributing family workers. What does that actually mean in practice?
It is a highly vulnerable employment status. Being a contributing family worker often means working in a family-owned microbusiness, maybe a small corner store, or working on a family agricultural plot.
Okay, so helping out the family.
Crucially, this labor is frequently completely unpaid or severely undercompensated compared to formal contracted employment. It lacks legal protections, it lacks benefits, and it certainly doesn't utilize a master's degree in chemistry.
It's just a brutal bottleneck. You have this brilliant, educated demographic trapped in a vice. On one side, a private sector that is too anemic to hire them. On the other side, domestic burdens that keep them out of the formal market altogether.
Which logically forces us to ask,
Yeah.
why is the private sector so anemic?
Right.
If the talent is there and they're willing to work, the invisible barrier stopping a local entrepreneur from hiring them must be the regulatory environment. We have to look at the rules of the game. We need to examine the institutional fractures, the governance, and the regulation.
Right, because if you want to build a business that hires 100 university graduates, you don't just need money and smart people, you need permits, you need property rights.
Yeah, you need a banking system.
Exactly, you need a banking system. You need to know that if a supplier breaches a contract, a court will actually enforce it. You need functional governance. What do the Worldwide Governance Indicators, the WGI, tell us about the soil this economy is planted in?
First, let's briefly define how the WGI works for you listening. It's a massive research data set that aggregates views on the quality of governance from corporate, citizen, and expert survey respondents worldwide.
It's basically a global report card for governments.
Exactly. It scores countries on several dimensions. And the data for this region is highly sobering. Let's unpack the metrics for government effectiveness.
What exactly does that measure?
It measures the quality of public services, the quality of the civil service, the degree of its independence from political pressures, and the quality of policy formulation, essentially. Can the government effectively do its job?
And the score?
The estimate for this region is persistently negative, sitting in the lowest global percentiles.
Wow. And what about corruption? That is always a massive friction point for private sector growth. If an entrepreneur has to pay a bribe just to get a building permit, that's literally a tax on growth.
The control of corruption metric, which captures the extent to which public power is exercised for private gain, including both petty and grand forms of corruption, shows percentiles that are oscillating, but importantly, they have clear downward trends in the most recent reporting years.
Okay, so basic government effectiveness is low, and control of corruption is trending in the wrong direction. What about the actual legal framework, the rules that businesses rely on, the rule of law?
The rule of law estimate is continuously sinking. It traps the region in the 25th to 30th percentile range globally.
That's rough.
This is a critical metric. It evaluates the confidence that economic agents has in the rules of society, specifically including the quality of contract enforcement, property rights, the police, and the courts.
The foundation of business.
Yes. When the rule of law is weak, economic trust evaporates. You will not sign a complex, multi-year business deal if you don't trust the courts to enforce it.
And I imagine the regulations themselves are a hurdle.
Yes. Alongside the weak rule of law, regulatory quality, which measures the ability of the government to formulate and implement sound policies and regulations that permit and promote private sector development, also sits at the lower end globally.
Let's put ourselves in the shoes of an investor for a second. Let's say you are a tech CEO in London. You are looking to outsource a major coding project or set up a new remote customer service hub.
Okay, well, I'm with you.
You look at the spreadsheet. You see a 99% literacy rate and thousands of newly minted, brilliant female graduates. You think, perfect, let's build a hub there.
Seems like a no-brainer.
Right. But then you look at the WGI metrics. You see government effectiveness in the bottom percentiles, weak rule of law, downward trending corruption control, and poor regulatory quality. If your local partner steals your intellectual property, you might not be able to sue them.
Or the courts might take 10 years?
Exactly. If you need a permit to lay fiber optic cable, it might be stalled indefinitely. What is your move?
Your move is to invest your capital somewhere else. Maybe Eastern Europe, maybe Southeast Asia. This creates exactly what economists call the investment chill.
An investment chill.
Yeah. Low institutional quality directly and mathematically suppresses private sector investment. Foreign direct investment, or FDI, is crucial because it brings not just money, but technology, managerial expertise, and global market access.
But it won't come if it's not safe.
Exactly. But FDI will not flow into a system where contracts are hard to enforce and regulations are unpredictable.
And it's not just foreign money, right? The local money leaves too.
Exactly. Domestic capital, instead of being reinvested locally to build factories or fund startups, seeks safe havens abroad. The wealthy move their money to foreign real estate or international stock markets.
So everyone is pulling their money out.
Right. The only money that consistently flows in is the official development assistance, the foreign aid, which, as we established earlier, doesn't build autonomous, self-sustaining industry.
So the square wheels on our car aren't just the lack of water and physical land. They are the bureaucratic, legal, and institutional systems that are just rusted shut.
That's a great way to put it.
But as bad as those institutional fractures are, the source material points to something even heavier. The ultimate ceiling that dictates everything else. The political instability and the demographic pressures.
Yes, this is the root cause of the severe 20% GDP volatility we discussed at the very beginning. Let's look at the specific WGI metric for political stability and absence of violence or terrorism.
Now, I want to be really clear here for you listening. Looking purely at the economic metrics and stripping away the politics for a moment, the instability here creates an impossible math problem for investors.
Absolutely.
We aren't taking sides on the conflict, we're just looking at the data. The data is the data, and we need to analyze how it impacts the economic machinery.
Precisely. And the data here is at the absolute extreme end of the spectrum. The estimate for political stability is consistently below -2.0.
How bad is that on the scale?
To put that in perspective, the index ranges from roughly -2.5, which is the worst, to 2.5, which is the best. Being consistently below -2.0 places this region among the absolute most volatile environments in the world.
Staggering.
Furthermore, statistical analysis shows that even the upper bound of the 90% confidence interval for this metric is leagues below the global average.
Let's translate a -2.0 political stability score into economic reality. What is the direct consequence of that number?
It is the ultimate destroyer of long-term capital formation. We touched on this earlier, but it bears repeating with this specific data point in mind. Banks and investors calculate something called a risk premium.
Right, the cost of doing dangerous business.
Exactly. If they're going to invest in a risky environment, they demand a much higher potential return to justify that risk. When the political stability index is below -2.0, the risk premium becomes so astronomically high that almost no legitimate business venture can promise a return high enough to justify it.
The math just stops working.
Completely. You simply cannot finance or build a 20-year manufacturing facility, or a massive data center, or a complex logistics network. No bank will underwrite the loan without massive sovereign guarantees, which just don't exist here.
So what kind of investment actually happens?
Well, the only investment that happens remains short-term, small-scale, and highly informal.
And while the economy is completely paralyzed by this instability and lack of investment, the population is not standing still. The demographics are compounding the pressure every single day. The data refers to it as the youth bulge.
The demographic weighting is profound and incredibly challenging. The 0 to 14 age bracket makes up nearly 40% of the total population.
Wait, 40% of the entire population is under 15 years old?
Yes, the natural population growth rate is exceptionally high. This creates a massive dependency ratio.
Meaning the working age population, who, as we've seen, are already struggling to find jobs, has to economically support a phenomenally large number of children.
Exactly. It puts immense crushing strain on the educational system, though. As we saw with the literacy rates, they have miraculously managed to educate them against all odds.
Which is still mind-blowing.
It really is. But it also puts strain on healthcare, on housing, on water, on food imports.
I want to visualize this demographic reality. Imagine the sheer scale of the pressure. Every single year, a massive wave of hyper-educated, literate, degree-holding youth graduates.
They're ready to work.
They are eager, they are ambitious, and they crash onto the shores of the local labor market. But because of the investment chill, the lack of rule of law, and the -2.0 political stability, that labor market has absolutely no jobs to offer them.
None.
Year after year, the wave crashes, the youth are stranded, and the societal pressure just builds.
It is a demographic heavyweight that the current economic structure simply cannot lift. And adding to this incredibly complex human tapestry is the refugee reality. Millions of people in this region live under the UNRWA mandate.
UNRWA, that's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees.
Correct. The data notes that forced displacement has surged due to frequent conflicts over the years. When you have a massive population of refugees and internally displaced persons, the baseline vulnerability of the entire society multiplies.
Because they have even fewer resources to fall back on.
Exactly. The source data points out that social insurance safety nets for these highly vulnerable groups are severely limited. They don't have robust unemployment cushions or comprehensive pension systems or generational wealth to fall back on when a crisis hits. They are living on the absolute edge.
It is a precariousness that permeates every single layer of society. You have high education colliding with high demographic pressure, high political risk, and low institutional support.
It's a perfect storm.
It really is. It brings us to the ultimate synthesis of this deep dive. Because we can't just leave the car sitting there with the Ferrari engine revving and the square wheels stuck in the mud.
We need to talk about solutions.
We have to look at what the research suggests as an actual pragmatic pathway forward. How do you actually escape this structural trap?
Let's first quickly summarize the grand resource mismatch to ensure the foundation of the solution makes sense.
Good idea.
The trap is this. The region possesses near-perfect human capital, a highly educated, literate youth. But this potential cannot transform into industrial productivity due to extreme political instability and severe governance deficits.
Right.
Concurrently, the massive trade deficit and the heavy dependence on foreign aid ensure the economy remains on external life support, unable to generate its own autonomous momentum.
So, the million-dollar question. How do you fix an economy that has brilliant minds but broken physical borders and paralyzed institutions? I mean, you can't magically invent more arable land. You can't instantly wish away decades of complex geopolitical conflict. What is the actual pragmatic pathway out?
The source material highlights two critical interdependent avenues. The first is a strategic pivot to the digital economy.
Okay, the digital economy.
Specifically, leveraging that highly educated, underutilized talent pool, especially that 26.1% of women holding bachelor's degrees for information and communication technology, or ICT, service exports.
Oh, wait, because a digital export doesn't wait at a physical checkpoint? Is that the logic here?
That is exactly the logic.
If you are trying to export physical goods, say, those wooden chairs from our earlier example, or agricultural produce, you have to deal with physical borders. You need customs, you need paved roads, you need supply chain logistics, all of which are hindered by the political and geographic constraints. But if you are writing code,
Exactly. If you are writing software, providing high-level cybersecurity analysis, doing remote architectural drafting, or managing cloud infrastructure for a company in Europe, your export doesn't sit in a truck waiting at a border.
it just beams out.
It moves instantly through fiber optic cables. The digital economy fundamentally bypasses the square wheels. It requires two main things: human capital, which they have in massive abundance, and internet connectivity.
Which is much easier to provide than a deep water port.
Exactly. It allows this highly educated, stranded workforce to directly plug into the global market without needing that physical infrastructure.
It's borderless productivity. That is a massive, tangible opportunity for that youth bulge. It turns their brains into the ultimate export commodity.
It really does.
But what about the institutional side? ICT can bypass a physical border, but it can't fix a broken legal system. A remote coder still needs to get paid, they still need a bank account, they still need a contract.
Which is precisely why the second solution in the report is absolutely paramount: institutional reform. The digital economy can grow organically to a certain point, but it still relies on a functioning local ecosystem.
You still need the rules of the game.
Improving regulatory quality and establishing a firm rule of law is the absolute prerequisite to attracting non-aid foreign direct investment.
Because FDI isn't charity, it's business. And business needs rules.
Exactly. If the local governance structures can demonstrate transparency, if they can control corruption, and crucially, if they can enforce digital and financial property rights, they can attract global tech firms to set up remote hubs.
Right, like outsourced R&D centers.
But the local governance has to be solid enough, predictable enough, to offset the broader macro-level political instability risk. You have to build an institutional microclimate of trust.
So if we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, the education system in the West Bank and Gaza is a perfectly cultivated, brilliantly engineered seed. The society has done the hardest part. They've built the human intellect against all odds.
They've built a Ferrari engine.
Exactly. But until the soil of local governance is enriched with transparency and rule of law, and until the overarching climate of political security changes, that seed cannot fully bloom into the high-capacity, prosperous economy it was designed to be.
It is the ultimate paradox of human resilience meeting structural limitation. The potential is undeniable, it is statistically proven, and it is just waiting for the right structural conditions to ignite.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. What happens to the psychology, the drive, and the innovation of a generation that has been given the ultimate intellectual literacy rate, university degrees, master's programs, but is persistently denied the physical and institutional space to do so?
It's a pressure cooker.
It really is. Could this incredibly unique pressure cooker, this collision of high intellect and high restriction, force the creation of an entirely new, fundamentally borderless digital workforce simply out of sheer survival? When the physical world is constrained by borders and checkpoints, does human capital inevitably find a way to conquer the virtual one?
That is exactly the frontier they are facing right now, and it's something the global economy should be paying very close attention to.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope you walk away with a totally new perspective on the mechanics of human capital, and we will catch you on the next one.